Rajdeep Sardesai also joins us. Rajdeep, this is the last budget before the government gets into an election mode. So how much will the politics be weighing over the budget maths?
I think, Rahul, you've got to look at this election budget in the context that we are heading into an election year. But let's be fair to the Modi government on one count. I think out of all the governments in recent times, he's been most willing to take risks irrespective of what the electoral fallout of that will be. I think, having said that, any government will be conscious that they cannot do anything in a budget that will affect their electoral prospects. But I don't think the elections are going to weigh as much as we think on the Modi government. Look, this is a government which believes that 2024 is a done deal. At the end of the day, if this was a government, contrast this, Rahul, to Manmohan Singh's government in 2013. In 2013, he was a beleaguered prime minister. He was being buffeted from all sides. The Anna Hazare agitation had taken a huge toll on the government's equity, and therefore there was a need to ensure that you did budgets that perhaps retrieve lost ground. This is not a prime minister at the moment who needs to retrieve lost ground. This, I think, is a budget more in the context of G20. This is a prime minister who this year wants to show himself as a global leader. Can he use this budget as a pitch to project India as a country that's going to be globally relevant? I think that's going to be the pitch, a new India sort of paradigm that he's pushing for, not necessarily the kind of usual populist SOPs budget. I don't think they have the elbow room to put in the SOPs in the first place. And I don't think instinctively, having started this debate on Revdi, the Prime Minister now can be seen to be the one who's urging the Finance Minister to give freebies. So I think Mr. Modi needs to be seen a little differently at times to other prime ministers when it comes to linking economic decisions to the political choices.
Okay, my slight different take on that from Rajdeep says he's shown immense courage in some places where you didn't necessarily expect courage, and he's held back in places which were easier wins, where you would have expected somebody with the kind of popular mandate that the Prime Minister has to be able to push through with greater purpose, and that's not happened, at least so far. Let's take a look at the word cloud, and this is something we'll update once the budget is over. It gives you a sense, and I'll pull out the last budget that was put out by the Finance Minister, gives you a sense of what her thrust areas were. Tax 48%, 48 times that word was mentioned. Infrastructure, again, one of the key thrust areas. Transport 28, health 25, economy 21 times, Corona 16, Atmanirbhar Bharat 14, the Prime Minister 14 times, agriculture 12, farmers 11 times. Infrastructure coming up so far on top, suggesting that that's one of the key thrust areas. If you go back and I'll compare with the first budget of the Modi government, there you had, because it was a new government, they were talking a lot about their schemes, trying to bring investment in, talking about manufacturing, talking about the banking sector, talking about infrastructure. And one of the things the government has worked on is production-linked incentives, PLIs. And there, the government showcases this, Dr. Lahiri, as one of its big achievements. The fact that you've got a PLI scheme, the results of which are visible now in electronics manufacturing. The opposition, though, says this is a subsidy for corporates. It's not doing as much as the government thinks that it should or could or is, and that money could be better spent.
The production-linked investment scheme incentive, I think, is too premature to declare it as a failure, because we know what is happening to exports of mobile phones and manufacturing of other commodities. There are 14 sectors where it has been given. And what we must remember is this, that there is always an initial push that you need to give to manufacturing in India, in a developing country. And once it happens, then it snowballs. The snowball effect is there. So I think it's premature. If it is not production-linked incentive, then what? I think this is a very sensible way of trying to promote manufacturing.
Shankar, your take, is it working in the way the government thinks it is?
Well, it's working in a couple of segments. But we must look at PLIs as the flyover. The flyover between where India needs to be competitive and where it is in terms of, like yesterday, Anant Nageshwaran's put out in the economic survey. His last slide was about India's competitive energy policy, the price that we pay, manufacturing pays for energy. So earlier governments used to give tax breaks, subsidies, subventions. This is a continuation of that same philosophy, is a flyover to bring that competitiveness on the balance sheets of those companies, and so that also brings in, India as has a large domestic market. So if you produce things that India consumes, it becomes profitable. If you produce things that India doesn't necessarily consume or is unable to export, then it will. So this budget, if we go back to your original thought on the word count, I think Atmanirbhar will figure out much more.
Sure. Let's take a look
Rahul, I just want to add
Yes.
3 things about PLI. The best thing about PLI is there is a sunset clause. It's for 5 years. Second, it has got an investment clause. It's not that you just don't invest and get this PLI.
No, but counter what Raghuram Rajan told me at Davos when I interviewed him during the World Economic Forum. He said, look at the value add component. How much value is being added when this manufacturing is being set up? You're not just importing kits and then assembling them together. How much value add is happening in India? That's the question he posed.
The question is value added positive or negative?
No,
No
but
company-
quantum of what? It's not just, obviously it will be positive, but how positive
But
quantum of?
here, think of a company which is coming and investing 3,000 crore. It can't be just a screwdriver technology. And the other is, it's sort of evolution process. Once you set up the mother plant, then ancillary industries will grow. Where do you start? Do you start with first ancillary industry which will produce all the components and intermediate goods? Or do you start with the mother plant and then people look at that mother plant and say they need this component, so let's produce it? That's what we have seen, if I'm not mistaken, in automobiles. Automobiles, you set up a mother plant and then you find ancillary industries coming up.
And that's visible in Chennai, in South India, if you see it. When Hyundai went, they created a whole ecosystem. When Maruti came to Gurgaon, they created and same in Gujarat. Now the EV guys, Foxconn, they're going to Gujarat. So they create the ecosystem.
It's inevitable.
And
once you have the motherboard, you need all the chips around it.
And also this is similar to the pattern that in an earlier era, when public sector undertakings were set up in Bangalore. Remember why the tech sector did well in Bangalore is because Bangalore already had that kind of ecosystem. Similar is Noida now, emerging as one of the PLI centers. So you create an ecosystem, and I don't think Dr. Rajan was, I think he was being harsh in his evaluation of the PLIs, because even in the United States, a large part of the inputs come from China or other countries, and there is value addition. But the difference is that United States has invested enormous amount of money in original scientific research, which is where India lacks, and that is what we need to do.